Great, thank you so much. So this is a collaboration amongst a number of groups. The newly formed MIT Center for Constructive Communication, which is based at the Media Lab, New America Task Force for Global Health, and a number of other organizations and advisors, together with input for our Atlanta pilot from several community leaders in Atlanta. So our goal is to reach primarily Black communities in Atlanta for this pilot who are trying to withstand the pandemic's impact on their physical, financial, and social health. We know from national survey data that Black adults are one of the most vaccine hesitant groups today in America, and we do have some top-level survey data on reasons for vaccine hesitancy, including worries about possible side effects, the fact that the vaccine is too new, and so there's a sort of wait-and-see attitude, and also concerns around politics having played too much of a role in the vaccines. And when we look specifically at the state of Georgia, where this pilot work is getting off the ground, we see a similar pattern here, the 40% referencing the fraction of African Americans who say they will either get the vaccine as soon as they can or are willing to get it but will wait, is the lowest fraction of these of the groups that were surveyed. So the problem that we came to, and with partners in Atlanta, is the problem with trying to broadcast actionable and reliable public health information is that many of the sources from which the best information may be currently available are not trusted by some of the communities that we're trying to reach. And in that environment of mistrust, there are, of course, many different vectors for misinformation that are going to not only affect opinions, but potentially behavior of communities. So the approach that we're taking in HealthPULSE is really grounded, first and foremost, in listening to the communities we're trying to reach through different channels, which I'm going to take you into a little more detail shortly. But we're looking at using technology and human methods combined to monitor local talk radio, Twitter, and actually where we begin with small facilitated group dialogues, which we can record and analyze. And what we're trying to do is analyze these different listening channels to identify prevalent concerns and misinformation, which, of course, some of which may persist over time, some of which may be very dynamic and needs to be tracked. And given some patterns of concern and misinformation, which really would be obstacles to effective communication, we have a process we're developing to tailor a messaging brief which marries the actionable health information we're trying to communicate together with historical and contextual information relevant to the community, so that we can actually address the concerns and misinformation. And then in order to actually share the messaging, identify and collaborate with trusted influencers that are already embedded in webs of trust with the communities we're trying to reach. And we have a lot of experience in working with social media platforms and social media analytics, and we'll combine that with offline messaging. So just to give you a sense, trusted influencers might include faith leaders, hairdressers, teachers, various different possible groups that have already established networks within the community. And finally, to sort of complete the picture of the approach, is to have a constant feedback loop, both from the influencers and members of the community, to understand what is and is not working in the messaging and create a responsive feedback loop. So I want to take you into some of the details to show you how technology plays a role in potentially systematizing and scaling this kind of approach, beginning with this idea of facilitated dialogue as a listening channel. We've developed a method of facilitated dialogue that begins by bringing small groups together, opening up with questions of asking people to share their hopes and concerns as they relate to COVID-19 in general and vaccination, which then leads to an open forum where people can share personal stories as they relate to those hopes and concerns. And in fact, there's an entire sequence of sort of activities that we take groups through, of course, in a pandemic through Zoom, in order to surface concerns and personal stories about health and vaccination. And those conversations are being recorded. And then through a tool that is built by Cortico, a partner in our work, and this is a 501c3 nonprofit organization, has created this tool where we can automatically index and go to COVID-19, to specific conversation recordings, and visualize the topics and the key concepts that are being surfaced in these conversations. We select vaccine as something that's a topic of interest, and this tool lets us very efficiently go to the raw transcripts and the corresponding audio from these different recordings. So with this tool, we can start to identify and lift up patterns of concern, patterns of misinformation, which are surfacing organically through these conversations. So I'd like to now play a 1-minute audio clip so you can get a sense of one of these patterns related to vaccine trials that has emerged from our recent analyses.
A woman of color in the United States. There's been stories of like a lot of medical measures or medical experiments that they kind of use like Black women or like Latino women as like the test rats. And
my friend's family is like mostly poor and Black, and the older Black family members like asked by people who are doing clinical trials if they would like to be a part of the trials.
A lot of times people are not like well informed, and experiment may go awry or something. There might be problems.
The concerns that kind of like stand out to me about the lack of, that's what I meant by lack of appropriate testing for the vaccine. Probably going to be tested on disadvantaged populations, and there might be like people who die based off that, just because we're trying to sprint through this the whole thing.
But they often use that population because they think, oh, no one will really care, or no one will really care that they're ignorant or something. So it can become a problem.
Combining this kind of analysis of small group discourse, we also have built, I'll show you 2 other tools and then bring it all together. A search engine that actually operates on local talk radio. So in this interface, we can type in vaccine trial and hit the search button, and then go to city and focus in on Atlanta talk radio feeds. And then what you're seeing scrolling through are search results, which you can then click through and listen to the voices of local talk radio. We're also automatically separating out those voices which are local call-in, so we can actually hear voices of individuals in the Atlanta area. And finally, we've developed an advanced search engine that operates on top of Twitter data at scale. So we can enter a text query such as "I don't trust the vaccine," and when we search, we can get semantically similar tweets from across the entire Twitter fire hose, or we can do localized search for tweets in the Atlanta area. So with these 3 listening channels, talk radio, group dialogues, and Twitter, we have developed a process where human listeners can use these tools to actually catalog and identify the concerns and misinformation that seem most prevalent. And then it's really critical to bring in both the most reliable, fact-based, science-grounded public health information that in particular addresses some of these concerns and gets across the messages that the community will hopefully be amenable to, and also to bring in historical and contextual information. And this leads to this idea of a tailored messaging brief. I'm not going to go through all the details, but I'll just give you an example of 4 patterns that have emerged in a recent run of this process that our team has completed. And you can see from these messages, this is now bringing together Twitter and the dialogue and the talk radio, different examples. So the first pattern that we see very clearly across all 3 channels is just the history of unethical vaccine and clinical trials, which is very much a source of deep mistrust in how the vaccine that is being rolled out in the coming months is going to be perceived. A second is a general institutional distrust, just the deep-seated skepticism of many in the Black community in the government's handling of the pandemic. A third is that the vaccine it has been rushed and therefore leads to hesitancy. And finally, concerns about potential side effects. And here, just to give you one very recent example, the baseball star Hank Aaron passed away, and just a couple of weeks before his death, he received the COVID-19 vaccine. And so we see in some of our data that this recent event, this current event, actually is interpreted through the lens of the potential side effects. And so there is a misinformation that it was actually the vaccine that caused his death. So these are, of course, dynamic, and over time we expect to see different kinds of misinformation. So we have these four patterns in this example. We can then bring in key public health information which is specifically relevant. So this just shows some actual data of the Pfizer and the Moderna participation. There was actually strong participation, Black participation in the trials. We also can pull together, this is a report from the National Medical Association. This is a group of Black medical professionals formed over a century ago to actually vet and monitor health-related issues from a Black community perspective. So we think the fact that this vetting from this organization exists is another important piece of factual information to bring into messaging. And then meanwhile, to understand what aspects of the message could help build trust, there's also various insights from the listening channels, including different trust networks beyond the medical networks, such as hairdressers, which I've mentioned before, the importance of faith leaders that we are hearing clearly in the listening channels. The importance of emphasizing Black representation in the vaccine development process itself, we're seeing as a sort of pattern that is will be of value to emphasize. Third example, just the importance of community empowerment, that positioning the act of being vaccinated as an act of community protection empowerment, we think is very clearly resonating in some of the patterns we're getting in our listening. So when you pull all this through, this leads to an example of a messaging brief that our team has composed. And again, without going into the details, just if you look along the green, you can get a sense of the architecture of a message that logically flows from these patterns of what we're hearing combined with the factual knowledge and the contextual knowledge. First, to open, and this would be a suggestion for how a trusted influencer could consider messaging to their community, to acknowledge the history and the legitimate sources of doubt and skepticism in the medical advice that they may be hearing, that the messenger of this has actually looked for answers for him or herself, and then just to go through some of the main areas of messaging around emphasizing Black representation and testing and vetting, representation and development of the vaccine, the evidence to date. If the messenger themselves has been vaccinated, they can report honestly on their experience and the effects that they encountered. And then finally, we hope a call for collective action to the community. So we're now developing a format that we think can be systematized of a kind of regular communication digest that includes some highlights of what we're hearing, a story that may be responsive to some of the concerns we're hearing, some key facts that are relevant, again, to what's coming in through the listening channels, and even then translating that into specific formats of messaging briefs, for example, a sequence of tweets that would be effective. So just to conclude then, as we think about this process of sharing through trusted influencers, there's also an analytics component that we're experimenting with to analyze at scale. Here's a cluster analysis of about 175,000 Twitter users that we've identified are in the general Atlanta area. We can actually, color-coded here, identify clusters that have shared interests or affinities, such as Black radio, Christian ministry, soccer, and use graph analyses to identify automatically top followed accounts These are potential trusted influencers that could, through Twitter, reach these communities in Atlanta. And so this gives us a way to potentially find trusted influencers along with sort of the intelligence on the ground. So just if I were to make one final point of why we believe this process is not simply bespoke to Atlanta and to the Black community, but could actually be lifted up and scaled, it's that there is a systematic way that we are marrying machine learning with human listening for the analysis of obstacles to communication. As we build a kind of process and repeatedly generate these messaging briefs, we can build up a messaging repository that can be combined with the human storytelling to determine the appropriate briefs. And we can use analytics to identify potential influencers and then build processes for bringing human recommendation and vetting into that process. And that is an encapsulation of the HealthPULSE approach. Thanks so much.